It's not often that one's very first game finds an audience, but Burning Daylight is an exception. Developed by a group of students at Denmark's The Animation Workshop, talk. Burning Daylight is a short, free game on Steam, set in a dystopian future, where players guide a mysterious person through a hellish world. With over 1,200 reviews and a mostly positive rating, this is an impressive first-time outing. We spoke with the game's director, 7-year-old Frederick Jeppesen, about the development process. We made the game as students. None of us had ever made a game before, so it was quite the task figuring out how to go about it. After all, we were taught the entire animation pipeline aimed towards film, and not games. So we went about creating the game as you would go about creating a film. The idea of the structure of the game was to create a game that was based on a series of rooms. The amount of rooms could vary depending on the amount of people we got on the team, and the amount of time available. When the story was ready, we storyboarded the rooms, relying heavily on the environmental storytelling as much as possible. I would say we went about it quite organized and planned. It had to be like that because we only had 1 year of production. Talk. It's a bit different compared to other schools. The students are responsible for their own education and production in the sense that the bachelor project is only as good as the time you put in. Most of third year, the bachelor year, you work in your groups, and you attend various classes throughout the week. But they are all related to the bachelor project, so it was quite easy to fit it in. However, we're extremely busy throughout the year. We were all trained in the Maya pipeline, and most of us had spent some time getting familiar with the Unreal Engine and the Substance pipeline. We had a teacher, Sam Atagazin, who came and helped us set up for us. To sum up, we used the entire software, triple a game pipeline, which was quite a task, because learning the workflow of game creation was extracurricular. Basically, we had to learn how to make a game while we were making a game. I am a huge science fiction fan, and Blade Runner and The Matrix had always been a great source of inspiration for me. And since all the students, with a few exceptions, are from the Nordic countries, using Norse mythology was a no-brainer. Aesthetically, to name a few important sources, we were all inspired by the paintings of Simon Stanhope and Diemen. We also looked a lot to anime for tech inspiration, Akira, Ghost in the Shell, etc. Also, the game Inside by Playdead was a huge inspiration. So much is said without a word being uttered. I would say most of the inspiration came from everyday life, and we just built on top of that. For example, the technology of modern man. We wanted to design how the world might look if Facebook was in charge. You could say that this is a modern version of the Plato's allegory of the cave. One of the biggest inspirations for me is the idea that we will surround ourselves with a lot of systems that potentially could lead to our own destruction, yet we do not question them. Burning Daylight was our attempt of making people think about their current actions, and show them the consequences of the future, if we do not change course. Thank you. I am happy to hear you like it. Simon Furble, the guy responsible for the first route, used a movable spotlight light in Unreal Engine. With an exponential height fog, they animated the light to create the lighthouse wash through the scene. The artistic motivation of this is because the main character is like a newborn at this point, so his worldview is limited. Therefore the light had to be limited. As a newborn, everything is scary, therefore dead bodies everywhere along with a menacing mechanical claw. This was our rule when developing the environments. The story is about a guy learning about himself. Therefore the environments had to reflect his journey from infant to god. Yet it was a huge task. I believe we had 500 different assets at the end. The CG artists on the team are all very efficient and prolific modelers, and they brought their game every day. All the assets and textures were made by hand. The short answer is that we just went for it. Old Martin Josephson, our technical art director, made an awesome system where the character walks along a spline. The spline had various points built into it, so when the character was at a specific point on the spline, the camera settings would adjust to that specific point. This system made the transition from storyboard drawings to implementation of the engine very smooth. Once all the shots was locked, it was just a matter of making them all they could be with the right lights, models and textures. Actually, I did not want the headset to speak until the final month of production. I wanted people around the world to play the game without being forced to understand English. However, my audio guy, Tobias Nielsen, convinced me by arguing that there was an opportunity to further the storytelling with more layers if we added the augmented reality companion set. The challenge of the wordless environments is that you have to work creatively with the symbols you put in. Furthermore, you have to work heavily with the feeling of the place, and give enough information for people to piece the puzzle together themselves. And at last you have to make sure that every environment is interesting and exciting so the player continues to be stimulated throughout the entirety of the game. After school, the team have all moved to different places. A lot of the guys are now working at game studios, different places in the world. If the entire team will ever get together and make a game again, depends on a lot of things. Time will tell. I have made a studio, www.morg.space, with Thorpe from the Burning Daylight team, and we are currently in early development of a new title. As a service to Gamasutra, here is very first tagline for the new story. Following the disappearance of her little brother, Mia Buchanan takes on the investigation through the mysterious Barrow Island to find her brother. An investigation that leads her on a dark and surreal path, where nothing is as it seems. We are currently writing it, creating concept art and coming up with the technical functions. Later this week, we will travel to the Nordic Game Conference with our producer to see if we can get in contact with interested publishers. This next game will be yet another dark, mysterious science fiction adventure, with all the grotesque and surprising elements that made Burning Daylight interesting and surprising. At the 2019 Game Developers Conference, you can look forward to an array of talks from speakers across the video game industry. During the week, you will hear from industry legends, niche experts, and amazing advocates, many of whom will want to learn about you and your work as much as you do theirs. At this year's Visual Arts track, Insomniac Games character TD No Alzair will dive into the facial rigging of Marvel's Spider-Man from Insomniac Games, showing off how the company incorporated third-party facial rigs, over 150 of them, into the production pipeline of one of 2018 best-selling games. To introduce you to Alzair before his talk, we reached out to her for a quick Q&A. You can now read below. Would you please introduce yourself and talk about your role in game development? I am Noah Alzair, a character TD at Insomniac Games, where I worked on writing for Marvel's Spider-Man, primarily on supporting any facial performance technical needs. Without spoiling it, what will you be talking about at BD? I will be talking about how we navigated feedback and integration of our most 150 face rigs delivered from an external company, and how we managed our little changes to those rigs for things that came up during production. What excites you most about the future of game development. The increased fidelity that will be possible with things like 5D scanning, as well as how increasingly cheap scanning technology will change out pipelines and block-ins as things become more democratized. What's something about your specific field you want your colleagues to know more about? Part of the reason I wanted to do this talk was that as our companies are springing up to specialize in things like facial rigging for the super high fidelity projects, more work that used to be done in-house is increasingly being done outside of the studios by teams that are not necessarily integrated and working off of the same project depot. That has no challenges when it's for assets that are near the beginning of the pipeline, like rigs, rather than just animations or static models. And it feels like something that could eventually turn into a stream on teams to constantly update things with new deliveries. So I will present our way we try to streamline things, and possibly start a conversation on best practices among studios who rely on subcontracting for things like that. Tell us about your favorite project you worked on in the last year. Well, my last 3 years have been on Spider-Man.